Yes, what is going on? Welcome back to the channel. Look, I'm going to be incredibly real. Chelsea is incredibly frustrating for me at the moment. Incredibly frustrating. We're in a bad place. I mean, everything that could be going wrong with a football club is pretty much going wrong at Chelsea right now. That Brighton game I went to the other day, I mean, that is up there with the biggest load of rubbish I've ever gone to watch in terms of this club, in terms of other teams. Chelsea were not in that game from the minute that first whistle went to the final whistle. We didn't have a shot on target. It was ridiculously bad. That isn't directly on the ownership, right? But yes, recipe of what they're putting together is a huge reason for all these issues erupting at once at Chelsea. But you can't tell me that the playing staff are doing enough. They were awful. They were so bad. They were so below the level of what it is to represent Chelsea on the pitch that it wasn't acceptable. Then the same goes for the manager. The difference in this manager compared to so many other top managers in the league at top clubs is ridiculous. The complete 180 flip-flop today has completely spun me. Because actually, that's all we've wanted to hear. But why haven't we been hearing it? And then you change. I almost think like, if you're going to keep saying that, you've kind of got to keep saying it and die by that sword. The fact that he's changed makes me more concerned, because is that actually what he believed? What he believed? What was PR? It's just a shambles. Everything at Chelsea right now is a mess from head to toe. And that all stems from the top, because the top is a mess. There are a number of different people involved in Chelsea that are all fantastically successful businessmen that are all worth billions of dollars, pounds, Swiss francs, euros, you name it, they're worth a lot of money, right? But what I'll tell you, what I will say is they 100% do not have this club's footballing future as their priority. They have financial benefits as their absolute first priority. There is no doubt about it for me. We are a business first football club. We are a team that have had the heart gutted out of it in terms of everything that is to do with the club that made it what it was over the last 20 years. It's gone. And it feels so strange to support a team that you're loyal to, that you've been chosen by, that you're committed to, that you have a huge amount of your life invested in, blood, sweat, tears, emotions, you name it. That's what it is to support a football club. You never win financially because it costs an absolute fortune. The better your club does, the more it costs. I don't care, and I don't really give a damn about what the owners make and if they make profit off the back of the club, to be honest with you, because it never impacts my life for a better purpose, to be honest with you, unless that money is put back into the club for it to then build and become better. But really, I never see any money in my back pocket off of the benefit of Chelsea's business strategy. Ultimately, it means I've got to pay a little bit more for tickets, or they become harder to get, or there's more merch, or, you know, it just... I never get a reward off of Chelsea making more money as a football club. Apart from, under Roman, it normally meant at the end of every season, there was something to be happy about that was a trophy. As simple as that. And that the next season we could go again and have that dream and have that belief. But that was a sacrifice me and hundreds of thousands of other people were happy to make, because we felt like it was a decent trade-off. And you know what? You can't choose your team, and not every team's going to win every season. But you know what? We were being operated in a way that allowed us to do so for 20 years. And I don't think any Chelsea fan believed it had to change. At least not as drastic as it has. Because I think the drastic adjustment at Chelsea Football Club lacks so much rationale and reason. Because, yeah, I think there were probably issues at the end of the Roman Abramovich era that meant Chelsea might need to change, with new regulations being put in from the Premier League, UEFA. I think things probably were going to have to change, but I don't think they had to be as drastic as they were. And I don't think 1.6 billion had to be spent in the window that it's been spent in. And I think there are so many problems across the board at the top of the club that it just becomes very confusing for a Chelsea fan to get their head round. Because I hear, you know what, I've heard from Egbarley, Feliciano, Bowley, Goldstein and Wiss since they've taken over the club. None of them have given me any confidence in the direction this club is heading in. None of them. I don't know if one on their own would. I feel like if I had to pick, Bowley is the only one that I felt at any point had a focus on the club's sporting achievements. Maybe not as a priority, but he definitely felt like there was a reason to improve the club's chances on the pitch that would help match up to his expectations in terms of revenue and profit and financial gain on the club. I feel like every other person is too drastically the other way, that financially they win, but it doesn't really matter if the club do or don't, as long as it does enough just to make them the profit. However, I still think that's blind faith on their part, because I think they're believing and putting their money on a bet that is incredibly naive and incredibly sort of ridiculous when you think about it, to expect that football will be linear, because I don't think it is. We watch way more football than them. I can tell you that. Whether you support Chelsea or another club or whatever, I guarantee that the average fan knows way more about football than they do, in terms of what happens on the pitch and a little bit off of it. When it comes to finances, I don't think we do. I think that's the reason they're billionaires. They are incredibly clued up and have the most intelligent, risk-taking people around them to increase their profits. But I can tell you that investing £1 billion and more, expecting players to have linear growth and this weird scattergun method, I don't think it works out in the way that they all think it does. Really, I've seen so many players to have huge potential and they not quite hit it. I've seen so many players be put together as a team and then they all grow at different stages and it never clicks at the exact time it's needed to for that team to be sustainable. I think back to Arsenal. They had, if you think about it, they had Van Persie. This is with young kids, by the way. Van Persie, Fabregas, Nasri, you name it. They had a lot of young players. Ashley Cole. They had all these fantastic young players, but they all clicked at different. Jack Wilshere, another player that failed to live up to it when he was at the top of his game as a 19-year-old, absolutely playing people off the park in the new camp. Never, ever got to the heights that people thought he would get to. But even the likes of Fabregas, Van Persie, Nasri, all those other players I've spoken about, Ashley Cole, all right, yeah, different ages, but they never quite clicked together. Aaron Ramsey, as a team, at the exact time Arsene Wenger needed him to. Because football's not linear, and you can't predict it in that sense. And I feel like Chelsea might become victims of that, expecting that all these players sort of click at the same time in a squad. Might happen. I'm actually not sure that it does, to be honest with you. And that's a huge gamble, because if that doesn't pay off and these players don't generate the type of money that we're going to need them to because of the amount of money that's been spent, I think drastic measures will have to be taken to get these guys out of trouble. And that is ridiculous that that's where this football club stands off of the back of what it was. It just isn't fair on any fan. And I know life's not fair, but it's not acceptable. And I think actually there are clubs in other countries and they are set up in different ways to prevent this sort of thing from happening. But arguably the league isn't as big as the Premier League, probably because the investment or investors don't view it as a chance to have full control. Teams like in the Bundesliga, they have the 49-51% rule, where the fans always have the majority to overrule decisions to make sure that the football club's best interests are sort of kept as the main focus. The Premier League doesn't have that, and I actually think the Premier League will be negatively impacted off of ownership models like this. I really do. I think it will make the league way less interesting to watch, because I think you can look at Tottenham. I think you can look at Manchester United. I think you can look at Chelsea. All right, Chelsea aren't where them two are currently, but we have been the last 2 seasons. They're huge clubs in the Premier League. They are 3 of the big 6, and they are being run in a way that is not results driven. And ultimately, I know clubs can shift and move around, but arguably the big 6 has been massive when it comes to the growth of the Premier League, and they've attracted the fans, the new fans that have come in, because they were the teams arguably with the most success, and they were the most attractive to watch, and they were also probably the teams that are on TV the most. So for the Premier League to benefit, as much as it's not fair on the little guys, and I'm not saying this from some entitled position, but I actually think the Premier League needs its best clubs to be focusing on the competitive side of the game more than its financials and its business, and kind of just let the Premier League growing and being better as a competition be the reason you make revenue as a football club, and teams wanting to better each other, meaning you make money on selling players, and you make money in terms of the growth of the competition, and more people wanted to have their eyes on it, meaning that the sponsorships go up and the revenue goes up and the merchandise goes up. And I feel like that's what the Premier League will lose if clubs move in this way. And I think the fact that 3 of its big 6 are moving in a similar direction, where it's so obvious that results aren't the priority, is going to be incredibly, incredibly bad news for the Premier League. Because I think you only have to look at other leagues, and it's obvious to see that the greed just isn't there, and these clubs are still focused on winning. And even at the very, very top of the game, even like Real Madrid, in the way that their whole club is set up, they make millions and millions, billions potentially. They are worth billions as a football club, but their focus is always on winning and always being the best and attracting the best talent. They barely make profit on any player they buy, by the way. Very, very rarely. Although unless they get them on a free transfer, but they're not a selling club. They're results driven. They have the smallest team, one person in each role. Jose Mourinho's spoken about it, that club is ran so fantastically well because there's so little conflict of interest. They're all pulling in the same direction, and there's only a couple of people. And they only have to tick a couple of boxes to get things over the line if they believe it's in the best interests of the club. And they all gain financially, I can tell you that much. They are all reaping the rewards of being involved in that club. And there are other clubs in the world that are operating in a similar way. But right now, Chelsea's got way too many people involved. And I know that was kind of around the houses, but I think Chelsea either need to completely be rid of this whole ownership group, consortium, or it has to fall into the hands of just one. And if it does, I would probably say that if it was out of the current people, it would have to be Todd Bowley for me. I feel like he's done enough to maybe give me a bit more trust, but it isn't much, I'll be completely honest with you. But I just think there's way too many people at Chelsea involved, and I don't know if I've mentioned this, because I know I've said a lot, but negatively, the impact that the press releases from these owners has had on the club, it's not out there enough, but I think it's really bad. I've watched interviews from every single person involved at the top of the club. None of them fill me with confidence. None of them are reassuring me that they are the people that are best for this club to go forward. And I guarantee you, this is everything Roman Abramovich was afraid of is happening in front of his eyes. And his Reign group that he backed and trusted to appoint the right people for Chelsea have got it completely wrong. So, look, I'm completely lost when it comes to the top of that. I think it would be unbelievable if we could sell up and just go again and have a second crack of the whip and hope we get it right. But the grass isn't always greener. But, staying on this side is incredibly frustrating as well. And you know what? If people want to go and protest, then let them, because I think they're within their right to. Because the club feels so estranged from what it was. Now, that's that whole side addressed. I wanted to get that out there because I know there's so much talk about it at the moment. For me personally, to just summarise, I would probably say that I'd be Blueco out as well. I think they've all messed up and they've all got attachments to things that I don't agree with, and there are people involved that I think are toxic and I think don't have Chelsea's best interests at heart. And I think as an owner, you have to have the club's best interests at heart, and as long as you're doing it in the right way, you'll probably reap rewards. if you have your interests at heart first before the club, I don't think the club ever benefits from that. And for that reason, and the fact that it would take so many people to change, I'd probably rather just see the back of them and say it's a failed experiment. But look, I'm willing to give people a chance. If they change and they do go, look, do you know what? We tried something and it isn't working and we're going to have to move the other direction, then fine. I could probably accept it as long as they executed it well. But to be honest with you, I don't know. Maybe that gamble wouldn't pay off because the grass isn't always greener. And I think it's something that might almost be wasted energy because I genuinely don't know when the ownership could change. It could be 10 years down the line because I think there are potentially restrictions in place. I'm not sure. I also think they would feel that if they were to sell the club now, they would lose money. So they'd probably rather try and hang around to make sure that they made enough money to at least break even and probably have some profit. So I don't think it becomes an attractive club to buy at the moment because I don't think they're looking to sell it at an opportunistic rate. And I think that's a huge issue because unless they just have all had enough, I don't see them wanting to sell up because these guys are businessmen that have enough money to be patient and wait around and hope that this one pays off as well. And at least give it time to have a bit of fruition. I feel like it's their retirement plan, to be honest with you. Look, let's go to the stuff that's happening on the pitch because ultimately, no matter what's happening at the top, you can get results on the pitch if you're good enough and you're willing to work as a team and just kind of like silence all of that out. I think we did a good job of that at the beginning of the season, and I think that was when fans were sort of saying we've got our Chelsea back because on the pitch it felt like we might have. Yeah, we knew it. I think some fans got carried away because I always knew at the top it was a mess, but it did feel good that we were playing and it looked like actually, do you know what? Maybe it's starting to click, but I think Maresca's got so much wrong in recent weeks because I was saying this point earlier on another show on Judge Mo's on the Rational League that the Premier League is so intense and so much money is put into analytics and studying data and studying other teams to make sure you have the upper hand that other leagues can't afford to do that. And I think that's where managers that come into the Premier League may struggle because they don't come under the sort of intense studying of their ideology to find weaknesses. People are employed at football clubs to find weaknesses in other teams as their sole job, their sole purpose is to find a way to win and break down the other team's tactics. They're very, very smart people now who are armed with AI as well. They have incredible technology at their hands. And they also have very, very smart brains. And they can find a way to win. And I think that's why we're seeing the likes of managers like Maresca who have backed a system and sort of said, this got me promoted in the Championship. This is what worked. Even when we faltered a little bit, we got through it. In the Premier League, one, I don't think that ever works. I think that is incredibly risky to expect that you can drop a lot of points and recover in a season because it's incredibly difficult to. We saw that last year. That even with a bit of form, we still didn't do enough to get into the Europa League or the... Well, Europa League we got, didn't we? But that was never going to be enough. But we didn't do enough to get into the Champions League, which is, for me, a minimum expectation at Chelsea. And ultimately, I don't think he has an answer for it. And I think right now as a manager, he's having to learn. Is he showing any signs of that yet? No. Is he able... Do this squad look like they're together currently? No. Does it look like we're going to win games at the moment? No. Do people fear Chelsea? No. Do any team feel like they can get a result against Chelsea? Probably, because even Ipswich did. So I just think it's something that has to be addressed. And right now, do I think you need to start calling for him to be sacked? I'm going to back him here and say no. He needs to change and he needs to do it quick. And that also has to be drastic. Because for me, Enzo Maresca is a guy that, when things were going well, I actually felt like I quite liked him. I felt like he was a good fit. But when it's been going bad, some of the waffle has been incredibly poor choice, poor taste. I think it's been incredibly harmful to the team. I feel like he's not only failing on the pitch currently, he's also failing with what he's been saying regarding the expectations of the football club. And maybe they are PR messages that are sent down from the top. And the fact that he's changed today worries me, because something's changed. Either he's decided to go against it and actually speak his mind, or someone has just said, look, we need to cover up for all this bad publicity you're getting. Start saying things the fans want to hear. Does he actually believe it? It raises so many questions because of that flip-flopping nature around what you are expected to do as a manager. Why have you lied to us, potentially? Why have you contradicted yourself? You shouldn't have done that. You're a Premier League club manager who should be backing himself, shouldn't have taken the job if you go against the beliefs of what people are going to be telling you to do. I understand that he's in a position now where financially it's more beneficial to say yes to what they're saying, and it all goes wrong and you get sacked because you're going to earn more money than you ever did probably in your playing career. But that isn't what I want to see. I don't think any fan does. I don't think I want to see a manager learning on the job at Chelsea. I think we're in a place where we are doing that right now. And I feel a little bit sorry for him at the same time, because I wouldn't say no if I was in his position to get the Chelsea job. I wouldn't have said no, because one, I would have realised financially what that means to my life, and two, it is a fantastic opportunity to get a job at Chelsea and hope that if it does go right and everything I do does work out, I actually might be able to do something really special and really put my name out there. So I don't blame him for taking it, but I feel sorry for him, because I also feel like when he needed backing, he has not been given it to the extent that he might have required, especially for an inexperienced manager. You know, there's one thing throwing a manager in the deep end and seeing if he can survive and if he can stay afloat and he can swim. But there's another thing doing it without even sticking around to help him in case it got tough, or, you know, having armbands there or a life ring to just chuck in if it gets really tough. They kind of just left, they threw him in and walked away and said, there you go, that's what you've got for the season, sink or swim. And I feel a little bit sorry for him, because if you're inexperienced, you wouldn't chuck a toddler in, would you, and walk away? You'd try and coach them through it or help them through it a little bit. If you had a guy that was like an Olympic swimmer and you knew he could like swim the channel, you might be like, all right, I'll be back in an hour to pick you up, because you believed he'd be good enough. But you'd still probably keep a watchful eye just to make sure you're safe. I know it's a random analogy, but I feel like that's what they've done with Maresca. They've just chucked him in to see what can happen, because they haven't backed him. They haven't supported him. Weird things have happened at the club. We've got weaker as the season's gone on. The PR releases have been very, very poor. Like I said, I think there's a complete and utter mistaken identity crisis going on at Chelsea, where they believe they've bought a club that wasn't successful and didn't have a blueprint that was working. But ultimately, they spent so much money. He's probably sat there thinking, why couldn't you have spent a bit of that money on me? On at least giving me the opportunity to succeed? And that's where I feel for him. And actually, I feel like some of the players that some people were telling me were so good and were at a level that were really, really capable of competing for things in the Premier League, it might just not be true. And some of them have gone through a purple patch. And I might have been conned a little bit. Maybe in a certain system, they just looked really good until it got found out. But I think ultimately, teams that are made of better players, they start to navigate this where the best players step up. And I think also experience does help, and we know there's not enough experience in this team. And I just think the way this squad has been put together by the sporting directors is just absolutely woeful. And I think that doesn't help Maresca. So I think change is needed at the top of the club, because I think that ultimately is the reason Maresca got hired. It's the reason all the other managers have been failures under their sort of reign. It's the reason that the sporting directors aren't capable of building a squad that is good enough to go and win. Because ultimately, with the money that's been spent, I still think they could have done a little bit to have gone against the grain a little bit, or, you know, just tweak it a little bit and turn around and say, look, we think if we do it a tiny little bit different, just a small bit, we might just see a little bit more sustainability across the board on the pitch. And they might have listened, because they obviously the owners trust these sporting directors enough to have put them in that position and give them that amount of power. But for me, drastically right now, Enzo Maresca has to get results between now and the end of the season, has to win the Conference League, must get Champions League football. And that is going to be incredibly tough because I just don't see how that happens right now unless he makes drastic changes. I'm going to do a whole nother video on what I think he needs to address tactically. I actually think, to summarise really quickly here, the squad that Pochettino finished with and the way that it was playing wasn't that far away from what I think is the best possible way to play for this team. I don't think he was that far off it because I think he was getting the best out of a number of players at the end of his tenure. And I think ultimately Maresca's kind of failing to do that. And I think ultimately the biggest issue is that I've said this for a while now, way before the results started falling off. Defensively, he is not good enough as a manager. And I don't think the players are. But he is absolutely not getting the best out of Cole Palmer. And I think that's a huge reason as to why Chelsea aren't getting results currently, and I think have sort of been a little bit lucky just on the pure brilliance of Cole being able to sort of go away from what the manager's asking and do something a little bit out of the blue and something magical. But right now, when that sort of dries up because the confidence is a little bit lower and the team are playing in a way that is just very, very suspect, I don't think Maresca's getting the best out of him. And I think to not get the best out of a player that good, I think that is criminal. It's really bad. So look, I'm not going to sit here and say he needs to go, but if he doesn't achieve those two things by the end of the season, then he'll have to go. And I do think if he doesn't make any changes, there is a huge risk he doesn't make Champions League football. And there is a banana skin that he doesn't win the Conference League. I think changes are needed because if you're in a bad spell and momentum and everything's going against you and your confidence is so low, those Conference League games become a little bit more difficult and a little bit more tricky to navigate, and they can throw up a Servette fixture and you might not be able to turn it round. You just don't know. You just have no idea what could happen. And because that's football. And I think it's a minimum expectation now that he wins it because of the favourability that we probably can get to the final off the back of the draw today. But even that final could throw up something. And we saw that with Olympiacos and Villa last year. Villa have ultimately gone on to show that they are a decent side. They're better than Olympiacos for definite. But in a one-off game or, a two-legged tie where you haven't done enough in one tie and it becomes a one-off game on the back of like a 0-0 draw or something, it can be really tricky. They can throw things up. And I would probably say that Villa are better playing Olympiacos last year than where Chelsea are currently now. And it's concerning because ultimately the Conference League really shouldn't pose a threat to Chelsea and we should have enough to win it. But if everything's not right at the club, games get harder to win. And that's an issue. And then ultimately we come round to the biggest thing for me that I think is so drastically important that it changes are the sporting directors. They are horrific. That there is surely not a business in the world that is allowed to blow someone working in a business is allowed to blow 1.6 billion on absolute rubbish that has no evidence and no proof that it could ever turn a profit, that it could ever generate the type of funds that you'd want to make off of investing that amount of money. I think everything they've done is questionable at this club. Everything they've done. The fact that they've come out and said managers have been the perfect fit, and by the end of 38 games, they've done a complete 180 as well. The fact that they've consistently been a part of a hiring process of managers that haven't been good enough. The fact that they've spent that money and ultimately what it's been spent on is a complete and utter waste. The fact that the team they've put together right now is an absolute shambles. The fact that over 40 players have come into Chelsea under their ownership and only between 5 and 8 have been deemed good enough to be competing for what in the Premier League, by the way, because we haven't got close. We haven't had a sniff at potentially winning silverware or top 4 qualification under their sporting direction. They are the sole biggest issue at Chelsea Football Club for me are the sporting directors. Because if the ownership were willing to have spent that much money, but they'd had different sporting directors, they could have ultimately been in a position to go and win things as a squad, because the money would have been spent in a different way. And it's just an absolute mess. I don't have much to say on them because I feel like I've said most of it, and I think everyone at Chelsea knows they are so far out of their depth. They've never built a winning squad. I think to have 2 sporting directors is absolutely crazy as well. And yes, they've been hired by the ownership that I also think is clueless, but I think an ownership that are willing to spend that much money potentially get a lifeline because they spent that much money. If that money is solely on the fact that they could withdraw money once that had been spent, then there's an issue, obviously. But if that money sort of keeps coming and they do continue to invest, then maybe they're just moving in the wrong direction. They've put their trust in the wrong people. But whatever happens, someone needs to come in as a sporting director, if this ownership stay, and start to question the ownership and say, look, we can't do that because it doesn't have the sporting direction of the club in its best interests. And I think that's massive. But ultimately, obviously, the owners will always have the final say. It's been a horrific 3 years under this current ownership, I think. Whatever it is, 2.5, 3. It will be a horrific 3 years, whatever happens. If you get to the end of 3 years, that much money's spent, that's the squad you have to show for it, that's the managers you've hired, that's the financial implications you've got yourself into, that's the risk you've taken, and all you have to show for it is potentially a Conference League and maybe scrape one top 4 finish in that time. It is just not good enough. When you look at what they come into, a year off the back of winning a Champions League and a blueprint that had been successful for 20 years, no matter how much you dress it up and say it wasn't successful towards the end and we hadn't won a Premier League since 2017. We won the Champions League in 2021. We had some of the best players in the world playing for us throughout that period after winning the Premier League. I don't care what you want to say on the back of Roman Abramovich's ownership. The fact of the matter is that for 20 years, Chelsea Football Club were the best run club in the country, and consistent period of dominance without having a consistent manager in place or a style of football. We just operated in a way that was relentless, and it was about winning. And you know what? I've heard so many other fans talk about their club. I don't think there's a more enjoyable way of being a fan than the way Chelsea were operating. And that's why I think we're all hurting so much, to be honest with you. Maybe it's a little bit biased, but I genuinely think it was a good way to be a fan and support a club, and it was a great exchange. Look, I'll stick by the club no matter what happens. And I think there are measures in place to protect this club that other clubs don't have, but they come with drastic implications. They really do. But that's why we have to protect things like the pitch owners. And that's why we have to make our voices heard. And fair play to the people that want to go and protest. For me, it isn't the right time yet, but it could get there. It really could. I think protesting is the most drastic form of action you can take as a fan. And I'm willing to give them a final roll of the dice and a chance. And just hope that things sort of start to correct themselves, and this ridiculous, outrageous bet that they've placed proves me wrong. But I'm getting less and less faith in the bet, I can tell you that much. Look, I know it's been a bit of a long one, and if you've listened all the way, then drop a like, honestly. If you skip through bits as well, then sweet. What I'll do, I might timestamp it. I might just timestamp it so people can kind of see what I speak about. But, yeah, it's a strange place. We've got a massive, massive game coming up against Villa. We've obviously had a week's rest as well, so let's see. But I know it wasn't a lot of on the pitch talk, but I just felt like I needed to get that out there. I haven't really known what to say or throw up a couple of videos. I feel like I could have made that into 3 separate videos throughout the week and put some stuff out there. But sometimes you just need to word vomit it all out. But look, come on, let's stick together as a fan base, because this is incredibly tough. I'll see you all in a bit, and fingers crossed we can get some points on the board, because it's been very, very difficult these last couple of months.